I'm Flavia Bellieni Zimmermann from the Australian Institute of International Affairs in Western Australia, and today we have with us Professor Rammohan from the University of Western Australia. We will be discussing today India-Australian relations, current challenges, and opportunities. Thanks for being with us, Anu.
Thank you for having me, Flavia.
Anu, can you please explain to us how the Australia-India relationship has evolved over the years?
I think basically on a person-to-person level, I think there's a very good relationship. For instance, when you think about sports, I always think about cricket, and there's a very good relationship with Australia. And over the years, though, the government hasn't engaged as much, the Australian government and the Indian government haven't engaged as much as they could have. I think there was the controversy about the Indian students in 2009. I think it's taken a while for that to get adjusted, but I think we're seeing Indian student numbers back to where they were at that point. But having said that, I think this relationship is going quite strong now because, especially since we are also an Indian Ocean based economy, and what we're seeing now is that Australia is joining the Quad with the United States, Japan, and India to look at ways in which they can, in some sense, counterbalance China's growing influence in the South China Sea. So that's happening in the political sphere, but also think there's opportunities for greater trade and relationship building, which hasn't happened so far for a country that's the world's second largest in terms of population and one of the fastest growing countries in the region. Australia doesn't have as much bilateral trade with India as it could have, and I think there is scope for this trade and economic relationship to also grow.
Thank you very much, Anu. And Anu, can you please explain to us to which extent the rise of the Indian middle class elevates India to an increasingly important country in the Indo-Pacific?
That's a good question, and there's a lot of talk about the role of the Indian middle class. And as you know, India is one of the youngest countries in the world, so there's massive demographic changes happening at the moment, and the Indian middle class is, by some estimates, about 70 million, which is a very conservative estimate, but we would argue that this is a very large number of people that could potentially be, be a big source of demand for greater consumer goods and could drive economic growth in the region, not just in India, but also in the rest of the Indo-Pacific. We already see that there's a big change in social media engagement. India has a very large number of young people that engage with Twitter and other forms of social media. So I just see that there is going to be a big demand for e-commerce, for consumer goods in general, and from the Australian perspective, for Australian exports, particularly high-end exports like luxury goods, things like cheeses and wine from Australia and fabric. Already we see a big demand for Australian minerals like diamonds and gold from the Indian middle class. But so I think there is going to be, from a strategic perspective, I think this middle class is going to be, could be a big source of highly educated professionals and could drive the economy not just in that region, but possibly have external influence on Australia as well.
Thank you very much, Anu. And Anu, can you please explain to us what are the main challenges and opportunities for Indian businesses in Australia?
I think one of the big, I'll start with the challenges. One of the big challenges, I think, is that Indian businesses probably see Australia as a very small market relative to other English-speaking countries or the EU zone. For instance, the United States has more than nearly 250 million people, and the UK has about 70 million. But looking at it from that perspective, India looks at Australia as a relatively small market. Indian businesses, they have been investing in Africa, in extensively, and also in other European countries. So what we're seeing is that because of this, the Indian diaspora here is also quite small relatively. For instance, when I came to Australia in 1991, I think there weren't that many Indians here, and people who look like Indians were actually Sri Lankans. So there was a larger Sri Lankan population than there was an Indian population. So it's grown obviously over time, but so that is a challenge, I think, in some sense, that they don't see us from the Australian perspective. Australia is not seen as a big market. Having said that, we do see a lot of Indian firms in Australia. The big firms like Infosys has a presence in Australia, and Tech Mahindra is based in Perth. And we do have big Indian multinational companies that have a presence in Australia. In terms of opportunities for Indian businesses, the biggest opportunity is we are in the zone. We are very close to Asia and very close to India as well, except that there are no direct flights. That is a challenge, but it's only 2.5 hours time difference between Perth and India. So in that sense, the proximity is an asset. English-speaking country, and many of the institutions are very similar to India. So it is quite familiar for Indian businesses, and it's safe, and from Indian business perspective, and this is a good place for them to invest, I would think. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anu.
You're welcome.
And now, just wrapping up our interview, Anu, can you please explain to us to which extent the Indian-American relationships might impact the Australian-India relationship?
I think as I understand, in the past, the United States did not engage as much with India because Pakistan was a strategic ally. But over time, we have seen a greater engagement with India, and in particular over Barack Obama's presidency and also the Trump presidency. They do see India now as a big superpower in the region to counteract the growing influence of China. So in that context, given that Australia is a good strategic partner of the United States, there is a way in which the US-India relationship is going to impact on Australia-India relationship. One of the sticking points, obviously, was in the past, as you know, India was looking to Australia to provide uranium for their nuclear program, and Australia was quite reluctant to give them that. But since the United States approved that plan, there has been a loosening in Australian attitudes also to provide India with the uranium they need. So that has led to some improvement in relationship. I think now with growing US-India relations, both in politically as well as economically, I would expect that Australia-India relationships, which are actually quite cordial, will probably grow even better. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anu.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you for being with us. And for more information, please visit our website, www.internationalaffairs.org.au. Thank you.